Alrighty, so the last few topics here of Unit 7, you guys, let's get into it, okay? So we're going to be talking about changes as a result of the world economy in this lecture and sustainable development, all right, which will be pretty short, right? So learning objective here, right, taking a look at 7.7, right, looking at the, trying to explain the causes and consequences of, this economic change, right, and global trade, right, increase in international trade, deindustrialization, and a growing interdependence in the world economy. All right. So, kind of the main two, concepts of this topic are really outsourcing and economic restructuring. Okay. So, looking at the world economy, right, recent changes, right, have led to increased international trade, greater interconnectedness across the globe. Okay. And so, that's what we're seeing in the world economy. All right. And, just to quickly, define deindustrialization, right, so that we are aware of what it is, right? It's when a country reduces its industrial activity, right, or those employed in the secondary sector, right? And if we're looking at the United States, right, I mean, the United States has experienced deindustrialization in the last, 40, 50 years, and this has led to greater tertiary service sector jobs, right, with lower salaries and, not necessarily that many benefits, right, to us at least, right, or at least in core countries, right? And, deindustrialization amongst the world, right, greater interdependence, right, has led to, as per Wallerstein's world system theory, right, more of this, power structure of core countries versus periphery countries, right? So anyways, all of this international trade and deindustrialization, et cetera, has led to outsourcing and economic restructuring. And this has in turn led to a decline in jobs in core regions and an increase in jobs in newly industrialized country. Again, specifically those in the secondary sector of the economy. And outsourcing is essentially, specialized jobs in manufacturing and production, as well as jobs and services outside an area or country in which a company is located, typically where labor is cheaper to achieve comparative advantage, right? So in other words, right, secondary sector jobs, companies are moving those into, lower developed countries, right? Because it's, cheaper labor, for instance, all right? And that in turn helps create more profit, right? And so economic restructuring, right, kind of similar to deindustrialization, right, when urban areas, right, industrialized countries are shifting from a manufacturer to a service, sector-based economy, all right? And that's what we're seeing in the developed world, all right? And manufacturing jobs, right, moving to developing countries, right? So some examples of some jobs that have been, outsourced, right, or those working in call centers, right, textiles, or I'll show you other examples here in a minute. Okay. So yeah, electronic manufacturing, right? This is huge, right, in South Korea, in China. Okay. We've got, textile manufacturing, all right? So, when it comes to textile manufacturing, at least for the United States, right? The United States is growing and exporting raw cotton. It's having it processed overseas afterwards, specifically in countries like China, Malaysia, India, Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam. All right, those are the kind of the top manufacturing countries. Okay. And of course, there are other examples of jobs being, outsourced elsewhere. I mean, we could think about Nike, right? I mean, it's headquartered right in Beaverton, Oregon, all right, but it's employing 4 times the amount of workers in Vietnam, all right. So Vietnam, right? They're known for their low-end manufacturing industries, okay. But think about Microsoft, right? Building a factory, right, in Vietnam again, right? And that kind of serves as a main production for cell phones, I believe. Okay. So anyways, here's just a simple, graph here, right? Looking at U.S. manufacturing jobs declining rapidly in 2000, ever since 2000. Okay, kind of seeing a rise here, all right, and that's mainly because of former President Donald Trump, right, and his economic policies. Okay. So anyways, outsourcing has led to this, what we would call international division of labor, right? When countries are engaged in, distinct aspects of production. And, you could also think of the international division of labor today in the world as kind of the reorganization of economic activities on a national and global scale. Okay, and there have been international divisions of various iterations of international divisions of labor over time. And specifically, we're seeing a very, very distinct one today, and I'll show you a map in the next slide. All right, but today's international division of labor is really an outcome of globalization again, right? The interconnectedness of the world economy. Okay, and to put in other words, right, the shift of manufacturing industries from developed countries to developing, right? I mean, again, companies need low-cost locations, right, in order to manufacture and assemble products, right? So that's why we're seeing more specialization in new regions, countries across the globe, right? Other examples for you, right? In 2017, 800 businesses in Vietnam produced more than 1.1 billion pairs of shoes, right? China manufactures high-tech goods because about 80% of rare earth materials are mined there. All right, and so spatially today, right, if we're looking at a map, today's new international division of labor is represented by the north and south divide, right? And we can see that 1/4 of the world's population really controls about 4/5, right, of the world's income, right? And so this is the international division of labor today, right? Again, where there's the shift of manufacturing jobs from core countries, right, to semi-peripheral and peripheral countries. Okay, nice. So a good question to ask is, why has outsourcing occurred? And really the contemporary economic landscape, right, what we're seeing, right, worldwide, the global economy, right, it's been transformed by various factors, right, post-Fordist methods of production, the multiplier effect, right, economies of scale, agglomeration, just-in-time delivery, etc. Right, so we're going to talk about those. So yeah, first point here, right, advances in technology and communication have allowed companies more flexibility, right, in the locations they choose to conduct business, right. If we're thinking about computerized logistics, right, how, business and information is organized, right, it's led to what we call just-in-time delivery. All right, this is referring to materials that are delivered when they are needed, right, for short-term productions. And companies do this because, if they do that, right, they avoid paying, right, to store extra inventory, all right. But just-in-time delivery allows companies to be located farther from raw materials, right. And again, right, companies are receiving raw materials as needed. Right? I mean, there's a downside to this. I mean, just look at what happened, right, in the Suez Canal, right, back in March, right, 2021, right. There was a stop, right, in the shipment of various raw materials and products. Okay, but that just shows, right, how globalization can be a bad thing as well. All right. Post-Fordist methods of production, right, that's just referring to the Ford assembly line, which I won't talk about in this one, but anyways, with post-Fordist methods of production, we're seeing flexible production that's really not centralized, right, in one facility, manufacturing facility. It's going to, post-Fordist methods of production are going to take advantage of outsourcing, just-in-time delivery, because they're relying, right, on advanced technology. All right, so with post-Fordist methods of production, right, automation is replacing the assembly lines. In other words, right, robots, computer systems kind of doing what humans were once able to do, right? And this allows for specialization, right? Smaller facilities, right? More specific jobs, right? That can kind of be done in one country, can kind of be done in, say, right, one factor of production, right, in India, another in China, one here in the United States, okay? And to make everything come together at one time in the end, right? But anyway, these post-Fordist methods of production, right, like I said, are going to lead to companies being smaller, centered on low-value manufacturing, and they're going to contract work, right, to smaller firms overseas. All right. So post-Fordist methods of production, right, that's ultimately kind of led to a decline in jobs in core countries. And in class, we saw that video of, what happened to Michigan, or Detroit, Michigan, that is. All right. So here's kind of a visual here to kind of, thinking about the Fordist method of production, right, where you've got, focus on supply and mass production, right, very much A to B to C kind of thing. Well, with post-Fordist methods of production, it's really relying on the global market, okay, and expanding, how a product is made, right, through outsourcing and offshoring. Okay, and we can see that it's definitely more than just point A to point B and then point C. All right, there's very much, like I said, global interconnectedness here. Other reasons why outsourcing has occurred, right? As more countries in the global south aim to provide cheap labor, right? Advocates of offshoring, outsourcing, right? Or offshore outsourcing, my bad, argue that people in peripheral countries are going to want jobs and opportunities, and that the multiplier effect is going to help the economy grow. So, in other words, those who promote outsourcing argue that when jobs go elsewhere, specifically the quote unquote global south, right? There's going to be more workers, more disposable income. That's going to lead to as more jobs are available, it's going to lead to new factories, right, and better employment. And because of that, with more disposable income and more workers, other businesses are going to pop up, right? For example, if there's a new factory to build cars and there's increased employment, right? Others might take advantage of that and construct, say, like a restaurant nearby, or a coffee shop nearby. Okay, and that in turn is going to lead to more jobs. Okay, so that's one argument. That's the multiplier effect, right? When an increase in spending produces an increase in national income and consumption. All right, so more development, right? So yeah, another reason why outsourcing has occurred: economies of scale, right? Businesses are going to look for cost advantages, right? So economies of scale, right? Essentially, cost advantages reaped by companies, right? When production becomes efficient. So companies can achieve economies of scale by increasing production and lowering costs. So here's an example, right, of economies of scale, right? The fixed costs, right, such as tractors or combines that are spread out over many units of production, right? The return on investment is greater because the fixed costs remain the same, okay? So here's kind of a little visual here explaining economies of scale a little bit more. Again, it's an economic term, right? That's going to describe the advantage that larger entities are going to have over smaller entities. So basically, the more they produce of something, eventually it's going to reap more reward. Okay, for various reasons. The bigger the company, right, they might purchase, things in bulk, for instance, or they might receive, as here, right, preferential treatment from governments or other external sources. Okay, so economies of scale, right, can seem a little bit tricky, but it's relatively straightforward, right? The more efficient a company becomes, right, the more production, right, the lower the cost for that business, right? Other reasons why outsourcing has occurred here, right? We could look at the least cost theory, right? This is a model that geographers use to explain kind of where businesses are, where they are, especially those in the secondary economic sector. It's essentially proposing, right, that businesses locate their facilities in a particular place because that specific location, right, might minimize the cost of production. All right, it's going to look at, transportation, labor, and the degree of agglomeration, which is another reason why outsourcing has occurred. All right, an agglomeration is a term that describes the advantages for companies in the same or similar industries to be located near each other, right, to take advantage of specialized labor, materials, and services. Okay, they might rely on transportation networks, right? The workers that are there. Okay, so in other words, businesses can assist each other, right, in controlling costs, right, through shared talents, services, facility, same access to the pool of laborers around. Again, transportation networks. Okay, so just think about what businesses are located near each other that are essentially the same. All right, restaurants, car dealerships. Coffee shops, okay, all right, and that's another reason, right, why you might see, businesses that are exactly the same, right, next to each other. But anyways, it makes sense to locate manufacturing because of this, the least cost theory and agglomeration, that is, right. It makes sense to locate manufacturing sites, right, further away from raw materials and markets, as long as cheap labor, right, can compensate for the added transportation costs. So in other words, if there are high labor costs somewhere, right, it'll reduce profit margins. So that's why it makes sense, right, to have manufacturing sites farther where labor costs are low. Okay. Lastly, why else has outsourcing occurred? High technology industries, right? I'm kind of going back here to the multiplier effect, post-Fortis methods. Okay, technology industries, right? Industries that use advanced methods and modern equipment, right? Are devoted to research and development. Okay. And that's led to growth poles, right? Concentration of highly innovative and technically advanced industries that stimulate economic development in businesses and industries. So in other words, industries, that are highly technical, right, highly advanced, kind of being, well agglomerated, right, kind of close to each other and to share the same, workers around the area, resources that are there. Okay. And Silicon Valley is a perfect example, right, of growth poles, of agglomeration, of these high technology industries that are using post-Fortis methods of production, all right? And you can see just how many of these, high-tech industries, right, are located next to each other or around each other, all right? So anyways, outsourcing, economic restructuring, right? Here are kind of the impacts of those, right? Benefits, or positives and negatives, I should say, for more developed countries and less developed countries. And you can take a look at this on your own. I think for more developed countries, there are a lot more negatives, right, in terms of outsourcing, right? The loss of jobs, right? Population losses, urban decay, right? Looking at Detroit, Michigan. I mean, companies do become more profitable at the same time. The costs of many goods, right, is low because of how efficient and profitable it is for jobs to move elsewhere, overseas. For lower developed countries, right, more job opportunities, more urbanization, industrialization, and increased middle class, right, more disposable income. But the negatives, right, poor labor laws, poor workplace, low wages. Okay. So anyways, moving on, the growth of these industries and outside of the core, right, has led to manufacturing zones, right, specific manufacturing zones. So as I state here, right, they're created by the growth of industry in countries outside of the core. These are where governments create favorable investments, right, and trading conditions to attract export-oriented industries. Okay, so there are various manufacturing zones. There are special economic zones, free trade zones, export processing zones. So special economic zones to start, right? They're designated areas that have economic laws that are more free market oriented, right, than the country's typical national laws. So the goal here is, again, to attract foreign investment, right, to bring in industries outside of that country. And a perfect example is Shenzhen, China, all right? Shenzhen, China, right? They're a special economic zone, right? Even though they are a city, right? And in 2017, because of being a special economic zone, they contributed more than $1 trillion to China's GDP. Okay, so that's an example there of SEZs. This map here shows other special economic zones in China. We'll get to that in a second, right? Free trade zones, right? Another type of manufacturing zone, right? They're usually located near ports and water, right? And they're designated areas where goods can be landed, stored, handled, manufactured, reconfigured, and re-exported, right, under specific customs regulations, and they're not subject to customs duties, right, or tariffs, all right? So Hong Kong, for example, is a free trade zone, an FTZ, right? No tariffs on the import or export of goods, okay? And as you guys know, right, Hong Kong is right near a body of water, so characteristic there, free trade zones. Exporting zones, those are designated areas in again, developing countries by their governments that offer exemptions, right, from certain taxes and business regulations, right, promote industrial and commercial exports, right? Tanzania, they initiated a export processing zone program in 2002, again, to encourage foreign investment, okay? And there are others as well in Latin America, right? Cool. So looking back here at SEZs, special economic zones, right? What we'll see with these is that more people are going to move to these areas, right? Especially in China. So there's going to be internal migration. right? That in turn, those again because of more jobs, but that in turn is going to lead to a wage decrease because there are going to be so many workers, all right, and an increase in the profit of corporations and companies, all right. And we could make a connection to SEZs to Wallerstein's world system theory, right? And that's essentially right that products made in developing states are exported for sale in more developed states, all right, and again, this is very reliant, right, on that global interconnectedness of the world, right, to make trade happen. Awesome. So let's wrap up here by talking about sustainable development, all right. Learning objective, right, explain how sustainability principles relate to and impact industrialization and spatial development, all right. So sustainable development, right, there have been numerous policies, I'd say really in the last 20 years, right, to attempt to remedy some of the problems stemming from natural resource depletion, patterns of rising mass consumption, the effects of pollution, the impact of climate change, right? So developed countries, as you guys are well aware, right, have used up most of the planet's ability to handle the effects of industrialization, right? We see air pollution, water pollution, soil depletion, depletion. Okay. And I don't really need to tell you what exactly, right, we've been using in the United States, right, other core countries that, don't really help the environment. Okay. I mean, this patterns, right, of rising mass consumption, right, or this never-ending need for more things, right, for example, vehicles switching, people switching vehicles out every 2-3 years, right? And of course, we see effects of pollution. But anyways, as concerns grow about humans' ability to maintain development globally, right, governments, businesses, organizations, and individuals, they're all seeking strategies to reduce the human footprint, right? And we can look at ecotourism, right, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, right, that kind of help out, these issues. Okay. So here's just a quick map here from our data in the world.org, right? Just looking at the per capita CO2 emissions in 2019. And as you can see, right, core countries, many of the core countries, right, the United States especially, kind of the highest amount, right, of emissions per capita. All right. So anyways, ecotourism. All right, ecotourism has become increasingly popular as a means of environmentally friendly and sustainable economic development. Right, it's tourism based on natural environments, right? Often environments that are threatened by booming industrialization or development. And ecotourism frequently helps to protect the environment in question, right? And it's also going to provide jobs for the local population. Okay, so in other words, the goal here is to enable lower developed countries threatened by industrial or other types of development to gain revenue through tourism. Okay. It's going to allow local people to control the businesses there, help the local economy. Ecotourism is going to allow tourists to learn about fragile natural environments, right, without having a negative impact on them. So, I mean, there are various places that you could tour, right? Glaciers in Alaska, fjords in Norway, rainforests in Borneo. Okay, the Serengeti, right, for instance. Okay. So, I mean, there are definitely negatives here. I mean, we could go on and on about some of the positives here for the local people, right? This type of tourism, again, that isn't really, emitting, any, CO2. Okay. But the negatives here are that countries may become economically dependent on ecotourism, right? Some countries, right? And climate change, right, is kind of threatening the pristine and unique features that draw tourists. So, I mean, if a country is economically dependent on ecotourism and climate changes, not really helping some of these places of destination, right? It's it could lead to negative economic impacts. Also, for many of these places, right, that draw in, right, ecotourists, right, there may be too many tourists, right? If there are too many tourists, right, that can negatively impact the environment. Okay. So here's some of the principles of ecotourism. Okay, you can pause it, take a look at it. All right. Nice. So lastly, we could look at sustainable development goals, right, as a way to combat, increasing, depletion of resources around the world. Okay, in 2015, the United Nations, right, developed these goals, right, these SDGs, right, Sustainable Development Goals, to help measure progress in development, right, such as small-scale finance and public transportation projects, right. So the goals the goal of these goals, right, is essentially to reduce the inequalities among countries in the core, periphery, and semi-periphery, and achieve a more sustainable future for all. So you can see there are 17, right? Poverty, zero hunger, good wealth and being, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And, the point here isn't to, to exactly, remember every single goal. Actually, you don't need to remember any of them at all, right? Some of them are pretty common sense, okay? But the goal here is to look at the themes of these goals, right? Looking at poverty, inequality, climate, environmental degradation, prosperity, and justice. Okay. And in 2015, all 193 members of the UN agreed that these goals would be met by 2030. Now, will that be the case, right? Probably not, okay, because implementation, right, of some of these SDGs vary considerably across regions, all right? India, they've implemented a dedicated freight corridor and are building a new high-capacity rail line to, reduce the amount of carbon dioxide, right, that they release. Okay, China, or not China, Chile, right? They have a connectivity subsidy program, right, to create a more competitive environment for transportation, right, in rural areas, right. So there are many ways that countries in the core and semi-periphery and periphery are doing this. All right. But anyways, here's another table just looking at the Sustainable Development Goals in detail a little bit more. All right. So there's a little quiz for fun, right? It's not going to be graded, just for fun, on Schoology that kind of looks at why these goals are being were developed, right? What are some of the problems related to poverty? For instance, how many people in the world are living in poverty? How many people go hungry every day? Okay, so I recommend you take that, right? Just to see what you know about that and get a little bit more of an understanding of these goals. Nice. So that's all, you guys. I will see you later.